All right, welcome everyone to the Pinniped community meeting, the first one of April 2021. Just a reminder to please adhere to the code of conduct when attending these meetings, which is listed right out here in the agenda. These are being recorded and will be added to our YouTube playlist later today. We do have some pretty exciting announcements today. We are cutting a release 0.7, and that leads us to the update in particular for impersonation proxies, since the release covers that. And I will kick it on over to whoever wants to lead the discussion on that and what to expect with this release.
I can give an update. So this has been something that we've been working on since February. The last release was February 11th, I think. So it's a solid chunk of work. Essentially what we've done is add support for the vast majority of real world Kubernetes deployments with the concierge. So before this release, the Pinniped concierge worked on a set of Kubernetes clusters, basically where that were sort of self-hosted, where the control plane runs in the cluster. That includes a lot of clusters, but it doesn't include any of the managed cloud provider services. And so in 0.7.0, we've added a whole second backend strategy to the concierge that supports those environments. So now we cover really a huge majority of clusters that people care about. And this should all be mostly seamless. Like the installation process is the same. It's still one command to install Pinniped on any cluster, one command to get a koop config, and that's it. And so we made sure that like the user experience continues to be very low touch, very automatic in every case. Yeah, so hopefully, I mean, in some ways, this is a very small change to like the user experience, but we've broadened support from some clusters to almost every cluster. So this will be going out today, along with the blog posts, hopefully.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Super exciting to see that happening. On to the next item on here, which would be the roadmap for April 2021. I take it, well, I'm assuming not too much has been worked on that, but I don't want to say anything further. As far as April 2021, looks like we have LDAP support and device code flow. Any updates there?
It has begun. We have started is the update there.
Cool.
This week.
Awesome. Yep. Any blockers that you're seeing so far as you start on this?
We're still in the technical design phase, I guess you would call it. And so Andrew and I have updated the kind of proposed technical design, and I put that as a possible discussion topic if we want to go over that in more detail today.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. Let's get right into it.
All right. Should I share my screen, or Andrew, do you want to go through this?
Go for it. You're hot.
All right.
All right, can everyone see this HackMD document? This is publicly available. By the way, I put a link to it in the agenda for anyone watching the recording who wants to look at it. It's part of a bigger technical design document for LDAP. So Andrew and I have been working on yesterday is specifically how does the CLI talk to the supervisor to enable CLI-based login through LDAP, where the CLI prompts for your username and password and never needs to open a web browser which is what it would do for an OIDC login. It would open a web browser. In the web browser, your OIDC provider would prompt you for your username and password. This is, I think, Matt and Pablo, you've never seen this, so this is going to be a real live discussion. So your feedback is, of course, welcome. Everyone's feedback is welcome. Andrew and I thought one possible way to do this that might be nice would be to lean on the OIDC issuer to use the already published discovery endpoint and add some custom information into that discovery. So issuers and the supervisor correspond to the Kubernetes API object that we call federation domain. Each federation domain becomes an OIDC issuer, and each issuer then has the OIDC well-known discovery endpoint. And so what we're proposing is that each issuer, aka federation domain, advertises publicly what upstream identity providers it wants to advertise publicly. So it could be, for example, that it advertises all of them, all of the currently configured upstream identity providers, or maybe down the road we have some features where an administrator can say, I want to advertise these ones publicly, but not these other upstream identity providers. And in the public advertisement, it obviously is not going to share any private information. So it's just an identifier, a type to tell you if it's OIDC or LDAP. And if it is LDAP, it's very common to allow administrators to customize a discovery document. All right.
Okay, I got
there.
Question about that. So I wonder so I think I like the idea of advertising the IDPs here. I wonder if instead of actually sort of keying off LDAP versus OIDC, if we should just key off of password-based grant flows or web browser-based grant flows. So I'm thinking ahead, like if we added SAML support as a browser-based flow, the CLI client actually shouldn't really have to care about that, because in both cases, all it does is open an authorized endpoint in the browser. It might still be useful, I guess, for like if we have an interactive selection. It might be nice to see, oh, this is an LDAP provider, or this is a SAML or OIDC provider, but maybe it would also be useful to just say like, oh, and if you don't care about that field, you can also know like what front end type this is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, to a certain extent, our login CLI command doesn't really care, right? It just needs to know if it's web-based or not web-based. I think maybe when we get into the Gatekoop config command, that's where it might be helpful to know the specific IDP type. So maybe we can jump into that next. And yeah, of course we could change that, or we could add an additional field to say if it's web or password based. So Pinniped Gatekoop config. So a reminder for people who might be watching the video, this is the command that you use after you install Pinniped. You use it as the administrator, and it gives you back a kube config that you can then hand out to your users. So you get one kube config that has no identity encoded in it. It has no passwords encoded in it. It's safe to give it to all of your users. All of your users can use it to log in. So today, the way that works is typically you would use it against a workload cluster. That workload cluster has the concierge software installed on it. And the key thing is that Pinniped Gatekoop config doesn't even know that there is a supervisor cluster or a Pinniped supervisor app running elsewhere in the world. It's unaware of it, blissfully ignorant. So that brings us back to discovery. Because Pinniped Gatekoop config can see that the concierge has a JOT authenticator type configured, it can know that there is an issuer, which would be specified in there, and it can do discovery against that issuer without knowing whether it's a supervisor or just some generic OIDC supervisor, which means it can look for this custom field in that response. And based on that custom field, it can choose to act differently. So what we were proposing is 2 new fields when you do, new flags when you do Pinniped Gatekoop config. You can specify either none of these new flags, or both of these new flags, or just one of these new flags. So you can say my upstream IDP is this name, and or my upstream IDP is this type. So you can say basically, I want a kube config and I want it for my LDAP IDP. Or I want a kube config and I want it for my IDP called corporate IDP. And it would give you back that kube config through a kind of best effort discovery and comparing what you asked for versus what's available. And if you asked for nothing, the idea is if there is exactly one choice available, it will make that choice for you. But if there are multiple choices available or no choices available, then it can error and show you a list of choices that are available. I'll pause there for a second, discuss.
Yeah, I like this. Is we when we're running this Gatekoop config command, we sort of assume that we have access to the workload cluster where the concierge is running. We don't necessarily have any access to where the supervisor is running. So like the discovery docket seems like a really natural place to put that. And it's an existing API that's meant to be extensible for this kind of thing. It's a trivial API to like build with because it's just this sort of JSON structure, and we can put our custom stuff in there. Yeah, this seems great.
This, I mean, obviously assumes if there are multiple IDPs that the developer knows which one that they need to log in through, right? Do we have any evidence that supports that a developer would know the right auth path?
Yeah, that's a great point, Pablo. So usually the Pinniped Gatekoop config would be done by the administrator who created the cluster. And so hopefully because they created the cluster, they would have configured the multiple IDPs, or maybe they would be closely related to the team that runs the supervisor and configured the multiple IDPs. So hopefully they would be able to select on behalf of their end user, their Kubernetes developers, or whoever it is that they're handing this cluster to. And then they could hand them the fully formed kube config that already has that selection baked into it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And also it sounds like if you can control which IDPs are advertised this way, you could have, if you were like an administrator and you knew that you had like the main login flow through corporate SSO, and then like maybe a backup login flow through some local directory, you could choose not to advertise that one, in which case anybody using Gatekoop config this way would not have to specify anything and they wouldn't get prompted. They would just default to that, the one that's preferred, right? Does that also mean that if you do set those flags, you can set them to a value that doesn't appear in discovery?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we should think about that. I don't think we wrote that down. Maybe you can add a comment to the doc here while we're talking about it. Think about how that would work, because that would be nice as a feature, I think, potentially. And thanks, Pablo, for mentioning multiple IDPs. Today, Pinniped doesn't support having multiple IDPs configured in your supervisor at the same time. That is something that we've been planning to do. And we've always kind of danced around it, knowing that we will do it someday. It was even in our backlog, our prioritized list of work. We just haven't got to it yet. And so this design, I think, actually plans for that and gives us the framework to do the multiple IDP support. It's kind of killing two birds with one stone. All right, so assuming that then you have a kube config generated by what we talked about, Pinniped get kube config, then that kube config is going to have in it embedded a Pinniped login OIDC command with all the flags already specified. So let's talk about how we would enhance this command. What we're suggesting is that it takes the same two flags again, where you can specify the name of the IDP and the type of the IDP. But in this command, you either must specify both flags or you must specify neither of these two flags. One of those two choices. You can't just specify. This command meant to be a little less automatic self-discovering and more just told exactly what to do. So if you specify both flags, then the CLI is going to do discovery anyway, because it's an OIDC login, so it's always going to do discovery anyway. So since it's going to do it anyway, it might as well take the IDP name and the IDP type that you asked for and make sure that they appear in the discovery document. And to Matt's point earlier, maybe it's okay if they don't appear. So we get to think about that. And then when those new flags are not specified, we have some options, right? So we're still going to do discovery. You could hit the discovery endpoint and not get any of this custom field back, which means you're probably not talking to a supervisor. You're talking to like Google or somebody else, in which case we can just do what we used to do. Otherwise, for backwards compatibility, if it sees that there's exactly one IDP listed, and that IDP is of type OIDC, then it knows it's good to continue. Because for backwards compatibility, if you didn't specify these flags, like if you have an old kube config from before we implemented this feature, these flags aren't going to be in there. But if there is exactly one IDP listed in the discovery, and that IDP is of type OIDC, then it can go ahead and do what it used to do. Otherwise, it could be an error, or again, we need to figure out, based on Matt's comment, how to. Okay, now, once it's decided that the input is correct, and it knows what IDP it wants to log into, how does that work? Andrew and I did a spike where we actually implemented a dirty version of this my prototype. And so what we're suggesting is that now that the CLI knows that it's an IDP of type LDAP, it knows not to open a web browser. It knows to prompt the user for their username and password. It even knows what your custom prompts should be for the username and password from the discovery document. So it can go ahead and prompt the user. And then rather than opening a browser and starting that whole OIDC flow, it can hit the authorized endpoint, which is the first endpoint in the normal OIDC flow. And it can post some custom query parameters to say, I would like to log in to an IDP of this name of type LDAP. And it could also post some custom HTTP headers to say, this is my username, this is my password. That authorized endpoint would then be able to verify all those inputs, make sure that that username and password match the LDAP system. And then it can complete your login by just immediately redirecting with the auth code to your requested redirect URI. The CLI can get that 302 response as the immediate response to its first request. And then it can just do what it normally does to complete the OIDC auth code flow, get all your tokens, get you logged in. The rest of that doesn't really change. I'll pause there because there's one more topic after this.
So this means that even this local password based flow still requires opening the listening port for now, but actually we could
It's an implementation choice. Yeah, we could
on the
either open the
client.
port and let the code do what it does today, or the client could not open the port, get the callback response, the 302 response, look at the location URL, parse the auth code out of the location URL, and just use it immediately without ever opening the listening port. That's obviously, when you think about the code, that would branch the code so that the LDAP code shares less code with the OIDC in the CLI. But that's,
But I guess
okay.
that if we that change is only a change in the client, there's no the server side behavior in either of those cases is the same.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Either way, it's just a 302 back to your original redirect URI with the query param, which is your auth code. Yep. So the client can decide how to interpret that.
And this would also support in the future, maybe this is what you're getting to next. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that in the future, it should be possible to also perform this style of LDAP login from other clients other than our first party CLI based flow. We don't need this today, so we're not proposing that we build this today, but we want to make sure that we leave room for it because it's something we've talked about, maybe would be in the future roadmap of Pinniped. This would, for example, this would be like third-party dashboard web UIs that are running in your Kubernetes cluster. Log into these dashboard web UIs using their own identity with their own RBAC permissions, and then perform whatever actions they want in their cluster through a web UI. That web UI would presumably become an OAuth client to Pinniped, and would want to do the traditional web-based OAuth auth code, or the auth code flow. So we want to leave room for that. And I think this design does leave room for that. Partly because the custom parameters that we're proposing that we add to the authorized endpoint, the custom headers for your username and password are things that should not be used by third-party clients. In fact, if a third-party client, when I say client, I mean OAuth client, if an OAuth client, other than the Pinniped CLI client, tries to send those custom headers, we should probably error, because we don't want to encourage third-party clients to ever handle a user's password themselves. So that would be, first of all, a browser wouldn't send custom headers in the first place, so it's very unlikely that they would do that. But just in case somebody tried to write a client to do that, putting the IDP name and IDP type as query parameters means that a third-party client could specify them if it wants to. So it could be compatible with that. And then we could redirect to a custom login page hosted by the supervisor. So the supervisor has a web form. That way, only the supervisor is handling your password and the third-party app is not. So you submit your username and password through the web form to the supervisor, and then it can complete the OIDC flow in kind of standard way to hand the tokens back to the client. And sketched out here all the technical detail of what that might look like. I think that was all. Anything on leaving room for potential web-based login?
Just to be clear, we would not build web-based login anytime soon, right? Or at least that's not on the roadmap for anytime soon.
It's not on the roadmap right now. Well, I mean, yeah, it's not on the roadmap right now.
My question is, so this I like the design. My question is, after doing this spike on design and a little bit of the prototyping, did it make your estimate of the level of effort here for LDAP go up or down?
So we never talked about it in the community meeting, but there was a earlier version of this design that was it put a little bit more burden on the client to make a couple of extra redirects and follow those redirects. That earlier version meant that there was only going to be a single way to log into LDAP, whether it was web-based or CLI-based, and based on whether you asked for a JSON flow or a HTML flow, it would act differently, but it's still the same underlying code would implement both the web flow and the CLI flow. This second draft takes that away. And so it means we're going to have two completely different code paths. If we eventually do add the web-based flow, we'd have basically a separate implementation. Obviously, it could share a lot of the code, but different endpoints with different implementations. So I think this proposal that we just went over together simplifies the work that we're going to do now, simplifies the client side a little bit, a couple less redirects to follow, which is what we're going to do now. So that's simpler. So it feels like it shouldn't be very hard. And it defers the slightly harder version for later, which is probably a good thing.
I feel like on the topic of complexity, I feel like the most difficult part, and Ryan and I were talking about this yesterday, I feel like the most difficult part is just to be fighting with LDAP dependencies. So like getting an Active Directory up to test with and trying to hook into that. And like those complexities still exist in this design. So
Yeah, that's really fair. I think we haven't even really figured out if we're going to have a way to test all of this locally in a kind cluster. And like we use Dex and we use that special local user authenticator webhook that we wrote to do local testing of the other pieces of code. Nothing immediately jumps out as the solution for this, but maybe we can figure something out.
I've tested this kind of thing before by using Open LDAP with a hard-coded LDIF file to initialize it. So you have a hard-coded set of users and a hard-coded set of groups, and those users belong to those groups in a hard-coded way with hard-coded passwords. That's actually really easy to implement. And I honestly haven't done that in Kubernetes, but I think it should be easy to containerize Open LDAP because it's just a Unix daemon. There probably is already a containerized version out there somewhere that we could use.
Cool. Again, my other question, so like level of effort, it sounds like still pretty complex. No, there was nothing here that we discovered that blows up the complexity more than we thought, which is good. My other question is, did we break down the work correctly? It sounds like maybe there's at least some chores that popped out, like setting up that Open LDAP could be a separate chore, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just part of that first big story. But I don't know. I know our breakdown was pretty product focused, and I think that was good because we still have the intention to deliver the product features in the same way. But I don't know if any of that needs to be tweaked given architecture.
I was pretty pleased with the breakdown that y'all did. I think that kind of still makes sense, just kind of incrementally adding to the API, which is the LDAP identity provider, and then hopefully the integration tests will just mostly stay the same. I do agree, Matt. I feel like I envision in the first story, that really big story, you have like 10 tasks that fall out, and one of them is maybe setting up some test infrastructure, and the other tasks are like writing the controller and writing the auth endpoint and writing the CLI necessary. So I feel like y'all's breakdown is still good. I don't know if Ryan, you have other opinions.
Yeah, I think so. That first story is a bit of a beast because it's the get the basic version of everything working all at the same time. But as we discussed before, we couldn't think of a better way to break it down and have that first story still deliver user value.
Yeah, I think we and maybe this is a little bit of a reaction to how we built the LDAP, the impersonation proxy, where we did break it down more, and then it turned out we just kind of like had to keep iterating on all of the stories at once until kind of they were all acceptable at the same time. So we split them up more, but it didn't actually help us.
We might be able to learn from that, and we could make the first story a feature branch, a PR branch, finish the first story, and then merge it. Because it will be a very incomplete implementation, but the way we wrote the first story, I think it will be a secure, usable implementation, as long as you only need this very narrow set of configuration options. That was harder with the impersonation proxy because it kind of either completely worked or you couldn't use it at all.
One other thing I was going to add, and this is a no op, I think, for us on the call right now, but Mo is out right now and he gave feedback about the API endpoint that is used for discovery. And so maybe there will be more discussion on that, but I wanted to give him space to like give his feedback once he gets back from his time off.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Well, at some point it's just too late and we'll just build the thing and ship it. That's okay too. But I did think like that is another new, the discovery document is another new API. Like I think a relatively low stakes API, because when we own both sides of the connection and we can tweak it in the future. It might be nice though to put a version in there. So maybe we could have a subfield of the discovery document that then contains something that looks like a Kubernetes type that has a kind and an API group and a version. And that way, if we needed to change it, we could change it using Kubernetes style API schema migration and advertise, basically have an intermediate state where we advertise both versions for a while, things like that.
Yeah, this is actually something that Andrew brought up and we discussed yesterday about like, well, how are we going to version this? And I think what you're hinting at here, Matt, is that we can't version the API itself like the path, because the path is specified by OIDC. It's a standard, we can't change it. That standard does not allow for versioning the path. We could, if we wanted to, add query parameters. So you could say like $v = 2 if you wanted to get version 2 of the custom fields of our discovery doc. Or we could build it in into the JSON response, into the custom part of the JSON response, like you were suggesting, Matt.
I suppose we could also use like content type negotiation, technically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Andrew suggested yesterday was maybe we don't need to worry about that now, because by not mentioning a version in any of those places, any of those possible places, it's implicitly saying this is version 1. And then you still have room to add on a query parameter or a version in the JSON or anything you want later, if you ever need a version 2. As long as the JSON, the future changes that you want to make to the JSON are backwards compatible, you can keep enhancing it without ever needing to introduce a version. It would only be if you want to make a breaking change that you have to figure out how to introduce a version. Did I characterize your assessment correctly, Andrew?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what we talked about.
Anything further on this particular topic?
Everyone,
Okay.
we'll talk more about this topic, I'm sure, but thanks for the discussion and the feedback.
Before we part ways, I did want to welcome Scott to the community meeting. I know he showed up just a little bit past some of the stuff we already covered, but I would love to hear more about you, Scott, if you want to share with the group where you're based, so what you're using Pinniped for, and anything else you want to share.
Definitely. So, hi everyone. I'm Scott Rosenberg, based in Israel. I work for TerraSky, which is a professional service organization dealing with a global partner of VMware's and dealing a lot with also public cloud and very strong in the DevOps and Kubernetes world. And I'm leading the I'm the practice leader for cloud technologies and automation. And leading the whole Tanzu portfolio for all of our customers. So dealing a lot with Pinniped these days, looking into it. Was using Dex and Gangway, have a lot of TKG projects by customers, so very happy now that Pinniped is integrated there, and been testing it rigorously, and definitely seeing the use cases for a lot of our customers with the impersonation proxy, especially with their GK and EKS customers that we have as well. So just wanted to join here and yeah, and meet the guys here, and happy to join in future community meetings as well, and learn about this project and hopefully contribute in the future.
Welcome, Scott. Glad to have you. Excited to hear your feedback too. So pop into our Slack channel, come to our community meetings. Can't wait to hear about your experiences.
Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I'll ask Andrew, Matt, and then Anjali.
Sure, yeah. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the engineers on the team, along with Andrew, Matt, and two other folks who are out of office today. And I've been on the team since we started.
I'm Andrew. I am, like Ryan said, also an engineer on the team. Also been here since we started like June-ish last year, I feel like was when everybody first got together. I know there was some folks working on this beforehand, but that's me.
Yeah, my name is Matt. I've also been working on the project since around June. Yeah, my previous Kubernetes identity contribution was the AWS IAM authenticator. It's authentication flow on EKS. I came in from Heptio. Anyway, super excited. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, great to meet you guys, and definitely have used your work in EKS before, so it's always nice.
Hopefully good experiences. It can be every auth system is frustrating to set up. So
exactly, Pinniped so far has been one of the easiest. So definitely looking forward to the LDAP integrations as well, and to see what happens with the product.
Hey Scott, I'm Anjali Telang. I just joined. This is my first meeting as well, and I'm a security PM working with Pablo, who is a member of the project. So, ex-Red Hatter, been with OpenStack, OpenShift, working on security for a while now.
Great. Well, great to meet you all, and look forward to meeting with you guys in the future as well.
Great, thank you for sharing. And thanks everyone for introducing yourself and for the lovely discussion topics. Scott, was there anything in particular that you wanted to talk to the team about today, or you just wanted to kind of join and listen in for the first one?
Just join and listen in today. I've actually watched all of the community meetings that have happened till now on YouTube as well. Just haven't been able to join, and hopefully should be able to join in the future.
Wonderful. Yeah, if you have any feedback you have as far as improving the community meeting, please feel free to share that with us in the Pinniped Slack channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Definitely.
Great. Okay, so does anyone else have anything they wanted to discuss before we say adieu? All right, so the next meeting will be April 15th. We do meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time.
9
And
9 a.m. Pacific.
Pacific. Oh my God. 11 a.m. Central time. All right. With that, we hope to see you at the next meeting, and thanks for joining. Bye.
Thank you so much.